What if the baby sleeping in the next room right now, the one whose eyelids are fluttering, whose tiny fingers are curling and uncurling in the dark, whose face is moving through an entire silent vocabulary of expressions that no one is awake to see, is not simply resting, is not simply powering down the way a machine powers down at the end of a busy day, but is somewhere else entirely, somewhere that science has only recently begun to map, somewhere that sits at the intersection of memory and sensation and the earliest whispers of a self becoming aware of its own existence. And what if the question of whether babies dream, a question that has haunted philosophers and parents and scientists for as long as human beings have been watching babies sleep, turns out to have an answer that is so much stranger and so much more beautiful and so much more consequential than a simple yes or no that by the time you reach the end of the story, you will feel something shift inside the way you understand sleep itself and consciousness itself and the mysterious interior life of the smallest and newest people in the world. This is the story of what happens inside a baby's dreaming mind, and it begins, as almost every important story about babies begins, in the dark. To understand whether babies dream, you first have to understand something about the architecture of sleep that most adults know in vague outline, but rarely stop to think about in any depth, because sleep is not a single state. It is a cycle of distinct states with different neural signatures, different physiological profiles, different relationships to consciousness and memory, and the processing of experience, and the most important distinction, the one that sits at the center of the dreaming question, is the distinction between REM sleep and non-REM sleep. REM stands for rapid eye movement, and it describes a stage of sleep during which the eyes move quickly beneath the closed lids. The brain is electrically active at levels that closely resemble wakefulness. The muscles of the body are largely paralyzed by a specific neural mechanism that prevents the body from acting out whatever the brain is experiencing. And in adults, this is the stage most reliably associated with vivid, narrative, emotionally charged dreaming. The stage from which people wake with the strongest memories of dream content, the clearest sense of having been somewhere, of having experienced something that felt real while it was happening and then dissolved like smoke the moment waking began. And when you measure the sleep of a newborn baby and look at how much of their total sleep time is spent in REM, the number that comes back is one that tends to stop people in their tracks, approximately 50%, and in premature babies closer to 80%, compared to the 20 to 25% that adults spend in REM across a night of sleep, which means that a newborn baby is spending not just more total hours asleep than an adult, but far more of those hours in the state most associated with dreaming, which immediately and urgently raises the question, what is all that REM for? What is happening in all those hours of electrically active, paralyzed, rapidly eye-moving sleep, and is any of it what we would recognize, or what the baby would recognize, as dreaming? Here is where the story becomes genuinely and irreducibly mysterious, because the honest answer to the question of whether babies dream is that we do not know, and the reason we do not know is not a failure of scientific effort, but a reflection of something philosophically deep about the nature of the question itself. Because the only way we have ever verified that dreaming is occurring is by waking people up from REM sleep and asking them what they were experiencing. And a baby cannot tell us what they were experiencing, cannot describe the content of their inner life during sleep, cannot confirm or deny the presence of the narrative, sensory, emotionally charged experiences that adult dreamers report. And so we are left with a gap between what we can measure from the outside, which is the neural activity and the physiological signatures of REM sleep, and what we cannot access from the outside, which is the subjective experience, if any, that those neural events are producing inside the sleeping baby's mind. And yet, the question does not end there, because the gap between can measure and cannot access is not the same as the gap between probably happening and probably not happening. And what neuroscientists and developmental psychologists have assembled around the edges of this mystery is a picture that leans with increasing confidence in a direction that is both scientifically grounded and quietly astonishing. The REM sleep of newborns is not idle, it is not rest, it is not the brain waiting for morning. It is, according to the best current understanding of its function, a period of intense neural activity during which the brain is performing operations that are essential to its own development, consolidating the sensory experiences of the waking period, strengthening newly formed synaptic connections, testing and calibrating the neural circuits that will eventually support perception, emotion, memory, and social understanding, and in older infants and young children, processing and integrating the emotional content of waking experience in ways that shape the neural architecture of the developing self. Now here is the first twist that tends to reframe everything. The hypothesis that commands the most scientific respect among researchers who study infant sleep is not that babies dream the way adults dream, with narrative coherence and recognizable characters and plot, but that the REM sleep of very young infants may serve a function that is, in a profound sense, the opposite of dreaming in the adult sense, which is that instead of the brain replaying and recombining stored experience, the brain in fetal and newborn REM sleep may be generating its own activity in the absence of sufficient stored experience to replay, essentially running simulations, firing neural circuits in sequences that the brain needs to test and activate in order to complete the wiring of the sensory and motor and emotional systems, creating the functional equivalent of experience in a brain that has not yet had enough real experience to build those circuits from the outside in. And this idea, sometimes called the ontogenetic hypothesis of REM sleep, developed by neuroscientist Howard Rothwag and elaborated by subsequent researchers, suggests that the enormous proportion of REM sleep in fetal and newborn life is not evidence of extensive dreaming, but evidence of the brain using REM as a developmental tool, as a way of bootstrapping its own architecture by generating internal stimulation in the absence of external experience, which is why the proportion of REM sleep decreases as the baby grows and accumulates real experience that the brain can use as raw material for the conventional functions of sleep. This means that the 50% of a newborn sleep spent in REM may not be 50% of sleep spent dreaming in any recognizable sense. It may be 50% of sleep spent in something closer to a controlled internal activation sequence, the brain wiring itself through internally generated experience, the way a musician practices scales before they have songs to play, the way a painter exercises their hand before they have subjects to paint, and the dreams, if they come at all, may come later, as the experiences accumulate and the memories form, and the brain begins to have enough of a waking life to replay and process and transform in sleep. Here is the second twist, and this one is perhaps the most haunting and the most beautiful finding in the entire literature on infant dreaming. Researchers who study the brain activity of infants during REM sleep have found that the areas of the brain that are most active during this period are not the higher cortical regions associated with conscious thought and narrative processing. The regions that in adult dreamers are busy constructing the story, assembling the characters, running the plot of the dream, but the deeper, more primitive, more evolutionarily ancient regions associated with sensation, with emotion, with the bodily experience of being alive, with the raw data of sensory experience before it has been organized and labeled and made into story by the cortex, which suggests that if babies experience anything at all during REM sleep, it may not be the narrative, character-filled, story-shaped dreaming that adults experience and report, but something closer to pure sensation, pure feeling, the unfiltered experience of sensory and emotional states, without the organizing frame of a coherent self, that knows it is experiencing them. Something that might feel from the inside less like watching a film and more like being immersed in light and warmth and sound and touch and the emotional weather of a consciousness that is just beginning to have a consciousness, that is just beginning to be something rather than nothing, that is assembling one sleeping hour at a time, the raw material of what will eventually become an inner life, a self, a person who will one day be able to look back and say, I was once new, I was once the smallest thing in the room, I was once a mystery, even to the people who loved me most. There is also something to be said about what happens as babies move past the newborn stage and into the second half of the first year and then into toddlerhood, because as memory systems mature, as episodic memory, the kind of memory that records specific events, specific experiences, specific encounters begins to develop, as the baby accumulates a real history of encounters with faces and places and emotions and objects, the content available for the dreaming brain to work with increases dramatically, and the REM sleep of an older infant or a young toddler may be doing something much closer to what adult REM sleep does, consolidating the memories of the day, processing the emotional weight of difficult or novel experiences, integrating new information into the existing architecture of what the baby knows about the world. And some researchers believe that the terrors and restlessness and sudden crying that babies show during sleep in the second half of the first year and into toddlerhood may reflect exactly this, may be the surface expression of a brain that is now processing real and stored experience in sleep, working through the emotional residue of a waking world that is sometimes overwhelming, sometimes frightening, sometimes too big and too fast, and too full of things that have not yet been made sense of, and doing the essential but sometimes difficult work of making sense of them in the dark. What does all of this mean? Held together for the person watching a baby sleep and wondering. It means that the answer to the question of whether babies dream is not a simple yes or a simple no, but something more interesting and more humbling than either. It means that the sleeping baby is doing something important, something that the brain needs to do so urgently that it devotes the majority of its sleep to it and begins doing it before the baby is even born. And that something sits in the territory between simulation and dreaming, between internal activation and genuine experience, between a self being built and a self that is already fully there to experience being built. And the science cannot yet draw a sharp line between those things, because the thing it most needs in order to draw that line, the baby's own account of their inner experience, is the one thing it cannot have. And perhaps there is something right about that, something fitting about the fact that the inner life of a baby in sleep remains, after everything science has learned, still partly and genuinely mysterious, still a space where certainty cannot fully enter, still a question that the baby cannot answer for us and we cannot answer without them. Because it preserves, inside all the extraordinary knowledge that developmental neuroscience has assembled, a small and sacred space of not knowing, a reminder that the interior of another consciousness is always, at some level, beyond the reach of outside measurement, that the most important things about a person are sometimes the most private, the most hidden, the most irreducibly their own, and that the sleeping baby, moving through REM and stirring and settling again in the dark, is already, in whatever way a brand new mind can be anything, already somewhere that belongs only to them. Subscribe for more mind secrets.